Part 2, 1969. A world away from the stinking docks of 19th century England. Dr. Richard Dole sits down to write a letter. On the page before him is a graph that changed the course of history. Across the top, it reads, "Smoking and mortality among doctors. Even walking becomes hard, as pain shoots through his legs. His work has taken tobacco off the streets, cleaned up the air we breathe, and given countless people a longer shot at life." From the archives of the British Royal Navy, a file marked "Confidential" reveals how the sailor-s disease continued to ravage the fleet until well into the 19th century. Reports tell of crews crippled by bleeding gums and rotting bones. Then, a breakthrough. But Thomas isn't impressed by the marvels of steam power or the telegraph. Inside the lecture hall, a sea of faces stares back at him. On shore, a small group of men wait anxiously. It's the kind of graph any doctor fears. The surgeon is a smoker, but is already sick. Reading the letter, he sees the writing that will haunt his nightmares. Could smoking really be to blame? And what does it mean for him? Ignoring the letter, he returns to his work. He decides that he needs more data. Then the phone rings. On the other end is a researcher from Oxford. He asks the surgeon if he can take part in a study, an experiment that will finally answer the question once and for all. The surgeon agrees and joins the ranks of other doctors who light up 20 cigarettes a day. When the ship finally docks, the men rush to meet Cook, desperate for supplies. They are starving. Food was sent ashore earlier, but it was stolen by mutineers. Men, desperate for something to eat. On the Resolution, food is plentiful, but it's not the right food. Oranges and lemons are in short supply. Cook hands the starving men something else. Something that hadn't been eaten before. Limes. He tells them to drink a glass a day and watch what happens. Later, they would find out that limes are full of vitamin C. That's why Cook was able to cure scurvy in the first place. Outside, a television crew waits. If this goes well, the media will pick it up. Suddenly, the quiet hum of conversation is drowned out by a voice from the back. Someone has a question. How can we be sure that cigarettes are to blame? Dole turns slowly to face the man. He knows exactly why the doctor is asking the question. Richard is about to step on the most explosive scientific controversy of the century, and even if he wins, he may never get his reputation back. Taking a deep breath, he begins to speak. All he sees are sacks of potatoes, boiled potatoes. He remembers the sailor who discovered the cure for scurvy on board the Mayflower. Back then, it was considered old-fashioned to boil potatoes, but the sailor insisted. He boiled them, mashing the skin along with the flesh. And within days, the sickest sailors began to recover. After throwing away the limes, the practice was eventually forgotten, until James Lind repeated the experiment 200 years later and realized the truth. Citrus fruits had done the job. Still, that wouldn't have helped Thomas. Scurvy takes 3 times as long to appear once you've stopped eating citrus fruits. But the damage done by eating only boiled potatoes is irreversible. Reports from the Pacific Station tell of how sailors on HMS Pyramus were cured of the disease with a daily dose of lime juice. Soon, every ship in the Navy will be issued a lime juicer. Sailors will be told that drinking a tot of lime juice every day will prevent scurvy. But in reality, citrus fruit won't stop the real killer. But he couldn't have done it alone. Behind him is a team of researchers whose names don't carry the same weight as is written in 19. It asks for volunteers to smoke 20 cigarettes a day for the good of science. There is no money, only free cigarettes. But Richard already smokes. He has for years. He loves the taste and the ritual, lighting up after lunch, leaning back in his chair and taking a long drag. How could he do this? Then the thought hits him. Why not? He has an excellent cardiovascular system, perfect health, and no family to worry about. So he writes back, accepting the invitation. The college is thrilled. It gets a smoker who is healthy, a perfect subject for their experiment. But Richard doesn't realize that the letter has gone missing. The Royal College of Surgeons, his professional rivals, had seen the request and wanted the glory for themselves. They send their own man, Dr. Austin Bradford Hill. Now, 2 healthy doctors will light up twice as many cigarettes a day, paving the way for future generations to follow. People like Dr. Austin Bradford Hill, whose own research into the effects of smoking had laid some of the groundwork for Darlah's landmark studies. Together, they have convinced governments that smoking should carry health warnings. They have stared down the tobacco industry and made peace with countless doctors who refused to believe smoking was dangerous. Most importantly, they've saved lives. Millions of lives. As Richard Dahl looks out at the sea of faces staring back at him, he feels a surge of pride. Today, He is the face of public health. Tomorrow, it could be anyone here. Scurvy steals your bones, as surely as it steals your smile, and then one night, he dies. Like so many of his contemporaries, his body is pitched into the sea, another soul claimed by the unforgiving deer. He leaves behind a legacy of agony and a story almost forgotten by time. Down the side are the years between 1951 and 1964, and in the columns are numbers that no doctor wants to see next to his name. The years they died. What Dr. Dole sees are two sets of lines. One set represents doctors who smoked, the other those who didn't. The smokers' line rises faster than the they are dying younger. He knows the public will react badly when this data comes out. The people will blame him for shattering a myth. But as he writes, one question keeps pounding in his head. How much longer can we keep lying to ourselves? Part 3. The Great Exhibition of 1851 in London. Queen Victoria waves to a crowd of thousands. The nation's greatest thinkers have gathered to unveil inventions that will change the world, from the telegraph to steam. But for Thomas, none are more important than an invention called a lime juicer. Its metal frame looks like an industrial torture device and serves a simple function, squeezing fresh juice from limes. For Thomas, it's also the start of a bittersweet freedom. Every day he squeezes limes, extracting enough juice to save dozens of sailors from scurvy, all while knowing he himself is doomed. The invention can't save him. No one knew at the time that it was actually boiled potatoes that had saved the crew of the Santa Maria, not citrus fruit. But this wasn't the first time this type of mistake had been made. In 1747, James Lind had cured sailors of scurvy with a simple remedy, but he had used sauerkraut instead of citrus fruit. This, too, had worked. Despite these mistakes, both discoveries would help define what causes scurvy. For Thomas, though, there is no cure. The disease tightens its grip. Teeth loosen, gums bleed. Part 4, 2016. For 70 years, Richard Dole's research has shaped public policy around the world. Part 5, Part 6, 2016. Dr. Richard Dowell picks up a letter from the Royal College of Physicians. Part 7. The Great Exhibition closes. People leave awestruck by the possibilities of the modern age. Part 8, 2016. Decades of research are distilled into a single moment, as Richard Dowell stands before the Royal College of Physicians. Part 9, 1795. Just off the coast of South America, Captain James Cook steers the HMS Resolution through stormy seas. Part 10, 1969. Richard Dole's letter lands on the desk of a prominent surgeon. He opens the envelope and pulls out the graph. 6 months into the voyage, Thomas learns the sea's true hierarchy. The lash is suspended from the mast above the mess deck, swaying gently in the breeze like a serpent poised to strike. Midshipman Graves, the apple of Captain Byron's eye, has leveled a serious accusation against Thomas. The boy swears he saw him stuff an extra biscuit into his pocket during the last meal. He can feel the blood trickling down his back, mixing with the salt spray and sweat on his skin. His vision blurs, and he vaguely sees the men watching him, their faces grim, their eyes holding a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. He cleans the wound and bandages it, but he doesn't offer any pain relief. The pain in his stump throbs in time with the relentless rocking of the ship. He struggles out of the hammock, drawn to the opening where he can see the vast expanse of the ocean beyond. They tie stones to his pockets, heavy cannonballs that pull him down into the watery depths, sealing his fate in a cold, uncaring embrace. Thomas screams, his voice echoing through the ship as he's tossed into the sea, his mouth twisted in a silent scream. And as the ship sails on, oblivious to the horror it's left behind, a single thought echoes in Thomas's mind: if I die, I won't rest. He leans against the railing, staring at the endless horizon, and feels the cold spray of the ocean on his face. He spends his days drifting in and out of consciousness, haunted by visions of rats feasting on his rotting flesh. They talk about throwing the bodies overboard, and Thomas's ears perk up. When the officers leave, the men carry the bodies to the opening. Thomas screams, but his voice is hoarse and weak and no one can hear him. The men turn to him, their faces grim. They know what must be done. They don't want to touch him. He won't let them throw him away like garbage. One evening, Thomas stirs from a fitful sleep to find himself sharing his hammock with 2 corpses, but there's nowhere to go. He's trapped in a prison of canvas and rope with the dead. He looks at the lifeless faces, their eyes staring vacantly into the darkness, and realizes that they're just boys, barely older than he is. He wonders if they, too, are trapped on this floating hell with him. The ship's biscuits, already weevilly and stale, begin to move on their own, as if animated by some dark magic. Thomas watches in disgust as weevils spill out of the biscuits, these tiny insects, these cursed confetti of the damp. But when Thomas examines his mug, he sees that even the meager amount he has left isn't safe. It's thick with algae and the occasional drowned cockroach, and afterwards they pay for it with their lives, their guts turning to liquid fire as dysentery claims them one by one. Pus oozes out, smelling foul, and the pain intensified. It becomes unbearable, driving Thomas to the edge of sanity. He begs the surgeon for mercy, for a quick end to his torment, but the man just shakes his head, muttering about saving the king's men and the sanctity of life. Finally, the pain becomes too much for Thomas. He collapses in the middle of the night, screaming for help, but no one comes. He spends the night writhing in pain, and by morning, he's close to death's door. He's still standing, but he feels like his insides have been wrung out, leaving him empty and hollow. Thomas lets out a scream that echoes through the ship, a scream that speaks of unimaginable suffering and the dehumanizing conditions on board HMS. The pain is unbearable, but something else is growing inside him, too. A burning anger towards the captain, towards midshipman Graves, towards the whole system that allowed this to happen. It's not a crime on land, but aboard HMS Erebus, every morsel of food is accounted for. In the dim lamplight, the surgeon cleans his wounds with coarse salt water. At night, the sailors hear the scuttlings and gnawing, the squeaks and skitters of rats feasting on their flesh. On this night, Thomas wakes up to a nightmare within a nightmare. The rat scurries away, disappearing into the shadows of the ship. His toe throbs where the rat had bitten him. He can feel the blood welling up, staining the hammock and his own flesh. Each dab of the cloth feels like a fresh stab of pain, and Thomas bites down hard on a piece of wood, muffling his cries. When he's done, he leaves Thomas with a coil of bandages and a grim look. You're lucky it wasn't more. Lucky Thomas thinks the word is a hollow mockery of the truth. The pain will fade, but the memory of it, the burning shame and rage, those will linger long after the physical scars have healed. For weeks now, its presence has loomed over Thomas, a constant reminder of the absolute power the ship's captain wields over the crew. Now Thomas understands. This is more than about justice, it's about control. By order of the captain, I sentence you to 9 lashes of the cat o' nine tails. He's heard whispers of men caught stealing an extra biscuit or shirking their duties, hauled before the mast and flogged senseless. Those men have disappeared into the shadow of the whip, emerging days later, skin peeling, backs split open by the cat o' nine tails. He protests his innocence, but the captain doesn't flinch. Guilty, there's a flash of white teeth in a grimy face, and then the cat o' nine tails is cracking down on his back. Pain explodes through his body, sending shock waves of agony through his limbs. Instinctively, Thomas throws his head back and screams. The pain is excruciating, but the shame of being flogged, like a common sailor, twists his gut with a different kind of agony. He fights to maintain his dignity, to hold his head high, despite the searing pain ripping through his flesh. But the cat o' nine tails has other plans. With each lash, his resolve crumbles a little more. Finally, the lash falls for the 9th and last time. As they drag him off to the surgeon's room, he vows to himself that if he survives this, he'll find a way to make them pay. When Thomas shows it to the surgeon, he just shakes his head and mutters something about the luxuries of life at sea. Suddenly, the surgeon is at his side, his face grave. Thomas tries to escape this watery grave, to outrun the disease that's stalking the ship, but it's no use. Days go by, or perhaps it's only hours, and the bodies begin to stink. Then he hears voices. Officers stand at the opening, discussing the state of the ship and the fate of its prisoners. And so they do something even Thomas wakes to the rhythmic slap of waves against the hull, a steady beat that lulls most of the crew back to sleep. Outside, the wind rizzes, whipping the canvas of his hammock and tugging at the tarpaulin that covers the open deck. Another squall. Thomas knows this dance well. Soon the wind will shriek, waves will crash, and the ship will shudder as if in pain. He sees the other men stir, their faces pale in the weak light that filters through the rigging. Some curse under their breath, others huddle deeper into their hammocks, but most just wait for the storm to pass, resigned to its coming fury, and then the abrupt awakening, the damp chill of the ship replacing the warmth of his hearth, the endless grey of the ocean stretching to the horizon, mocking the vibrant tapestry of life he left behind. Yet he finds himself unable to contribute, trapped by a nameless dread that seems to echo the turmoil within him. There are fights over scraps of dried meat or a crust of stale bread. Men grow gaunt and listless, their skin stretched tight over their bones, their eyes hollow and haunted. The ship, battered but unbroken, drifts on, a lone speck in a vast and unforgiving sea. Their hammocks are empty, their belongings strewn across the deck, as if they had been swept away by some invisible hand. Among the missing is Boatswain Carter, the grizzled old sailor whose weathered face had become a fixture on the ship. His disappearance adds to the growing sense of unease, a feeling that the sea itself is taking a personal interest in their fate. But the victory is short-lived, for when the crew unties the hatches and steps onto the deck, they find that the storm has left its mark. A sharp crack echoes through the hull, followed by a sickening lurch that sends men sprawling on the deck. The ship lists sharply, and Thomas, fighting against the pull of gravity and the rising tide, clings to the rigging, his fingers digging into the rough ropes, his body swaying precariously above the churning sea. The fear is still there, but it's overshadowed by a sense of detachment, as if he's watching himself from above. And as the icy water envelops him, he feels a strange sense of release, as if the ocean is taking him, not drowning him. Water, dark and cold, pours into the hold, threatening to swamp the ship. The horrors of the drowned ship follow them ashore, haunting their dreams and shaping their decisions. Thomas grapples with survivor's guilt, the memory of lost friends, and the unsettling feeling that they were betrayed. His journey leads him through treacherous waters and uncharted territories, both literal and metaphorical, as he confronts dangerous individuals and uncovers a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of power. He sees Hardman, his face etched with terror, disappear beneath a towering wave. He uses his experience as a sailor, his understanding of the Admiralty's practices, and his own personal connection to the conspiracy to drive the investigation forward. The outcome hangs in the balance as lives are lost, secrets are revealed, and loyalties are tested. Despite the danger, he presses on, uncovering layer after layer of deceit, until he reaches the heart of the conspiracy and the individuals responsible. There's Rebecca, a fierce and independent woman who lost her father on the ill-fated voyage, fueling her determination to hold the Admiralty accountable. Finn, a cunning and resourceful thief with a troubled past, brings his skills in deception and infiltration to the group. Thomas, haunted by the past but inspired by the future, realizes that the journey to uncover the truth was just the beginning. And Liam, a former Royal Navy sailor, disillusioned by the corruption he witnessed firsthand, joins them with his knowledge of naval tactics and unwavering loyalty. He sees the cabin boy, no older than 12, slip from his grasp, his terrified eyes wide and accusing. He struggles with the burden of leadership, the weight of the conspiracy, and the personal sacrifices required to bring the Admiralty to justice. But he's not alone. He can rely on the support of his crew, each of whom brings their unique skills. The Admiralty, desperate to protect its reputation and cover up its wrongdoing, employs spies, saboteurs, and assassins to thwart their efforts. Thomas and his crew find themselves targeted, forced to flee, fight, or negotiate their way through a series of thrilling and suspenseful encounters. And then he sees his own reflection in the cabin boy's eyes. The same terror, the same helplessness. For weeks, the men have endured hardship and privation, their bodies battered by the relentless sea, their spirits broken by the crushing monotony of life on board. The ship is gone, vanished beneath the waves along with most of the crew. "Thought you were gone," Hardman rasps, his voice hoarse with fatigue and pain. He looks at Thomas, his eyes searching, and then he collapses back onto the deck, his eyes glazing over. "Admiralty," he whispers, his words slurring together. "The Admiralty is to blame." Tension mounts among the crew. Whispers turn to shouts. Anger boils over into violence, and the once-taut bonds of camaraderie fray at the edges. Together, they stumble off the wreckage, two survivors on a sea littered with the ghosts of their dead shipmate. As they make their way through the debris, Thomas sees the mangled remains of the ship, the once proud vessel now a broken, defeated thing, a testament to the unforgiving nature of the sea. Thomas finds himself caught in the maelstrom, torn between the need to survive and the desire for something more. The crew, their faces grim, set to work repairing the damage and preparing for whatever comes next. Thomas joins them, driven by a mixture of duty and a desperate hope that he might find some purpose in the face of the mounting despair. But it's something else that truly troubles him, a growing sense of dread and foreboding that seems to emanate from the very depths of the ship. "We've lost good men," he says, his gaze sweeping over the somber faces, "and we must do all we can to honor their memory." They're faint, almost indistinguishable from the roar of the sea, but he hears them nonetheless, the cries of men lost to the tempest, swallowed by the unforgiving waves. And he knows, with a certainty that defies logic, that those screams are a warning, a harbinger of what's to come. It's as if the timbers themselves are groaning under some unseen weight, as if the ocean itself is reaching up, trying to drag them down into its inky depths. The officers, with their fancy cabins and plentiful rations, seem oblivious to the growing unrest. He sees the ghostly form of Boatswain Carter, his head twisted at an unnatural angle, his eyes wide and accusing. His face is weathered like old rope, his eyes narrowed against the horizon. "Looks like we're in for another round," he says, his voice gruff but steady. Thomas watches, fascinated and terrified, as the crew goes about their tasks, securing the cargo, battening down the hatches, and furling in the sails. Each movement is precise, honed by years of practice and necessity. He sees the sailors scrambling up the rigging, their bodies swaying with the rhythm of the waves, making repairs that will hold until the storm passes. He moves with the practiced ease of a man who's danced with countless tempests, but today there's a tremor in his step that betrays his confidence. And then he hears it again, the sound that haunts his waking moments and steals his sleep. The sky, once a placid blue, now wears a bruised purple, heavy with the promise of rain and worse. By nightfall, the sea has risen, a churning mass of froth and fury that crashes against the ship, threatening to swallow it whole. Lightning splits the sky, followed by a deafening roar that shakes the very foundations of the vessel. He sits up, pulling his threadbare blanket tight around his shoulders. As the day drags on, the wind grows louder, tearing at the sails and rattling the masts. Thomas remembers the nightmares that have plagued him since he left England. The dreams of home where his mother's gentle hands stroke his hair and his father's booming laughter echoes through the halls. And now there are whispers among the crew, tales of mutiny and murder, of treasure and revenge. The food, or what little of it there is, disappears quickly, leaving many of the crew, including Thomas, hungry and desperate. Thomas, too, feels the hunger gnawing at his belly, the cold seeping into his bones. One night, as the storm rages around them, Thomas is awakened by a sound that chills him to the bone, the sound of screams carried on the wind. The next morning, the storm has passed, leaving behind a sky the color of pewter and an ocean the hue of old bruises. The captain calls for silence and addresses the crew, his voice strained, his eyes haunted. For days, the ship struggles on, buffeted by the winds and waves, fighting to stay afloat in the vast and indifferent ocean. But Thomas, frozen by fear or indecision, can only watch as the ocean claims the ship, as the very timbers of their floating prison groan and tremble in the grip of the angry sea. Around him, men are washed away, swept into the dark abyss by the relentless waves. When Thomas wakes, he's lying on the deck, his body aching, his clothes torn and tattered. Thomas helps Hardman to his feet, his own wounds forgotten in the face of the first mate's obvious injuries. Years later, hardened by hardship and fueled by a thirst for justice, Thomas set sail again, determined to uncover the truth about the doomed voyage and the role the Admiralty played in their fate. Along the way, he gathers a crew of loyal and diverse companions, each with their own motivations for seeking justice. Together, this unlikely crew braves storms both literal and figurative, navigating treacherous waters and facing perilous challenges as they close in on the truth. As the stakes rise and the body count grows, Thomas is forced to confront not only external threats, but internal demons as well. In a final showdown that puts everything at risk, Thomas and his crew confront the Admiralty and its allies in a battle of wits, courage, and determination. In the aftermath, the truth is brought to light, bringing justice for those who lost their lives and holding those responsible to account. It clings to fine young ladies and seasoned gentlemen, coating them in grime as they weave through crowds on the narrow streets between the docks and the Bank of England. His mother, daughter to a baronet, Stephen should have followed his brother Thomas into holy orders or, failing that, taken a seat in Parliament, and of kraken so big that when they rise, men climb up their tentacles to see the land. Stephen listens wide-eyed until one of them tells the tale of a sailor who climbed into the belly of a whale to escape a storm. He needs to get out of this city, get to sea, but he also needs money, so he does the only thing he can. Stephen signs on for a voyage to Africa and the East Indies, where the schooner will pick up ivory, gold, spices, and men. In the flickering lantern light, his face looks older and harder than Stephen remembered. "Don't get sentimental on me," Nathaniel says, seeing the look on Stephen's face. Within hours, the schooner is dropping anchor in a natural harbor. Nathaniel heads toward them, eager to collect his money. Stephen stays on the boat. "I want to inspect the cargo," he says, his words clipped. Nathaniel nods curtly and disappears into the crowd. Stephen holds his breath. When the white-haired man turns toward him, he sees triumph and greed reflected in those cold eyes. The man walks slowly, each step deliberate, each movement predatory. Stephen shrinks back, instinctively knowing this man would strip him bare in an instant if he showed weakness, if he showed fear. Stephen knows he should jump into the fray, help the others. But when the man stops inches from him, Stephen can only stare back, powerless and horrified as the first lash cuts through the air. Even from here, he can feel the men's eyes boring into his skull. But his pleas are swallowed by the drumming. By the time he reaches the clearing, the men are kneeling, their bodies broken, their spirits crushed. Stephen rushes to his brother Thomas, but it's too late. Thomas doesn't recognize him, doesn't even seem to know his own name. Stephen sinks to his knees beside him, his dreams of adventure and discovery shattering around him like glass. He brought them all here, lured them to their doom. He could have saved them, should have saved them. And now there's nothing left to do but watch as the men are led away, their bodies still shaking, their eyes still holding the fire of resistance, the hunger for vengeance. Stephen knows they won't stop until every last man is dead. But he also knows that by helping them, he dooms himself. There's no winning this fight, only choosing which side to die on. Stephen closes his eyes and raises his head to the drumming, knowing that whichever way he turns, there's no escaping the sea. It's hot, humid. The air hangs heavy, thick with the smell of wet earth and woods. From the trees comes the murmur of voices and the scrape of a hoe on hard ground. Someone drums on a hollow log. The rhythm is hypnotic. Soon the schooner is surrounded by men, all staring at the captives with the same hungry gleam in their eyes. As the men are brought on deck, Nathaniel addresses them. "Remember what we talked about. Boys, make the sail, stay out of sight." "To Stephen," he adds, "don't let those ungrateful bastards bite the hand that feeds them." Then he turns away, whistling as he watches the longboat approach. "I know it ain't Christian, but it pays the bills. Besides," he adds, lowering his voice, "we got a tight hold on these. They ain't going anywhere, except for the tiniest of tremors in their hands and feet." The men seem lifeless. But Stephen knows better. They're waiting for their turn. They're biding their time. And when the moment comes, he'll be caught up in their fury, whether he wants to be or not. "We have a private matter to discuss," Nathaniel says, opening us. Inside, nestled among bales of cloth and coils of rope, are several men, shackled by the wrists and ankles. Some are old enough to be Stephen's father. Others are boys, barely out of their teens. They stare back with eyes as dark and empty as the hold they came from. "We picked them up on that last run," Nathaniel says. "Slaves, same as the rest. Got a good price for them in Antigua." He looks at Stephen, gauging his reaction. "You don't look well. You sure you're up for this?" Stephen says nothing. He already knows what it means to be bought and sold, to have no say in the matter. His gut twists, but there's no turning back. This is his choice. "Men," Nathaniel says with a wink. And Stephen understands. Sometimes the cargo isn't what you think it is until it's too late. He pawns his father's silver watch, the only thing left with any sentimental value. Then he heads to the docks, where a sleek schooner awaits. It sails heavy with the promise of adventure. Only a fool wouldn't take this chance, wouldn't trade a life of drudgery for a taste of freedom. Stephen isn't a fool, he's just desperate. And besides, freedom is all he's ever known. He emerges weeks later on the shores of a distant land, blinking in the sun. Stephen thinks the story must be true because it feels right. The sea swallows, and the sea returns. It keeps all its own. It took his brother, and now it wants him, too. All Stephen has to do is say yes. But from the time he could walk, he'd been bound to the sea. And that brings him to the South Sea House. Now, though he knows gambling is a game of chance, Stephen believes he's due a win. After all, he's had nothing but losses since leaving Portsmouth. If ever a streak of luck were needed, it's now. And as the croupier lays out the velvet cloth, he places his last £5 on red, on the promise of home and family, and on the hope that when his number comes up, he'll finally be able to say it was worth it. He's shipped out as a cabin boy, stowed away on merchantmen. Once he even swam ashore after his ship foundered off the Cornish coast. By age 16, he was sailing clippers in the West Indies. At 21, he was first mate on a merchantman bound for Africa. For a while, his only letters home spoke of storms weathered, cargoes sold and profits made. But then the letters stopped coming altogether. Stephen didn't know if it was because his brother Thomas had gone to his grave believing him dead, or because Thomas had never written in the first place. What Stephen did know was that he couldn't read without longing for the open sea. He couldn't hear the cry of gulls without feeling the pull of the horizon. He couldn't smell the tang of brine without remembering the coppery taste of blood in his mouth. And most of all, he couldn't hear the creak of masts and the slap of waves against the hull without wanting to run his fingers along the rigging and feel the wind catch at his clothes. He wanted to see the world, more than anything else. A hawker sings out, "Get your lottery tickets here. Get your lottery tickets," while a fellow pushes past, clutching a small cage full of canaries that warbled desperately against their wire prison. The South Sea House stands stark white against the dark London buildings, its facade scrubbed, clean, though what's inside remains as grimy as the rest. The room's dim oil lamplight reveals smoky faces bent over ledgers and tank. Bets are placed, bills discounted, fortunes won and lost, and in the corner booth, hidden under a wide-brimmed hat, sits a man who looks as though he'd rather be anywhere else. But soon he, too, will place a bet, one that could bring him everything or leave him with nothing. At 24, Stephen Whittaker is the picture of unfulfilled promise, a legacy undone. His father was a Church of England clergyman. Back in Portsmouth, the old salts at the tavern tell stories of how hurricanes swallow ships whole. But first, he needs money. His winnings don't last long. Before he knows it, Stephen has spent everything he owns. Desperation claws at him. The captain, a weathered man named Nathaniel Dance, knows Stephen's father and doesn't press him about his past. What's done is done. Best to look forward. A few days out of port, Nathaniel calls Stephen to his cabin. Days later, Stephen helps haul the men on deck. Their shackles are heavy, their chains jangled together like bones. From the crow's nest, Stephen sees the island first, a smudge on the horizon. On shore, two men wait, silhouetted against the blazing sun. One of the men, wiry with a shock of white hair, steps forward. As the men are dragged off, Stephen screams for them to stop, to wait.